Let's go.
Hello, welcome back to another video. I am your host, Adontron from Nerd Tots. Today's video, we're going to be talking about a movie called Oko's Inn. I caught this on Netflix. You can also catch it on Amazon Prime. You may have to pay for that one, but it is definitely a movie that is out there that you can catch online. Now, this one I am going to be short and quick with. I will give you a synopsis of the film at the end, like I always do. So if you want to skip to the end to go spoiler free, look below, check the description, and skip ahead. If you like the spoilers I give, stay tuned. I am going to give that to you now. So we start the movie at a festival that's for a hot spring, Hanaruyo's hot spring. And sorry if I mispronounced that. They say it only like 30 times in the movie and I still can't pronounce it right. But at this festival, you see two kids dressed up doing a dance in celebration. And you meet our main character, Oko, who is with her parents, and they're explaining to her how the waters of the hot spring welcomes everybody and they turn away no one, that they're magical waters as a gift from God that heals everybody. That's pretty much the slogan of the movie, healing. But before the festival finishes, Oko and her parents have to head back home. So they end up driving on the highway, and as they're driving away, you hear the music of the festival still going, and they flash back and forth between the two dancers. And all of a sudden, everything's dramatically changed by an accident that happens. Quite abruptly, a truck jumps the median and crashes into their car. Next thing you know, Oko's on top of another car, and she sees this boy who's drifting away. Fast forward a little bit, Oko's packing up her stuff and she's leaving her home, and she's taking like a train. She ends up at an inn which is owned by her grandmother. Turns out that her parents passed away in that car accident, so now her grandmother's taking her in. You find out quite early on Oko's not used to the nature life. She is actually very scared of spiders, lizards, and all that jazz. Turns out she meets two other people that work at the inn. They help her grandmother. One's a chef, one looks to be like a caretaker. Her grandmother is really like the hostess and innkeeper. They escort her to her room where she meets the little boy that was at the car accident, who turns out to be a ghost. His name is Uribo, and apparently he was a little boy that knew her grandmother when they were young. And he's excited because he hasn't been able to make friends in a while. And he's a little bit awkward because like when he first introduces himself, and like multiple times as you get to experience his character, he just picks his nose. Not a care in the world, just constantly, eternally picking his nose, which boggles my mind because I'm like, how can you have snot in your nose and still be a ghost? But then I started thinking about Ghostbusters, ectoplasm. It works. Either way, he talks Oko into wanting to be the innkeeper for her grandmother, to be taking up the mantle, as it were, because the current innkeeper was his former best friend before he passed away, and he's been looking after her for all this time, so he's wanting to make things easier for her. As the story goes by, time passes. You see one morning she wakes up and she hears a ringing bell. She finds it in a closet. She finds this little bell with like this demon face on it in a box that's just ringing, ringing, ringing. She puts the bell back in a box because that's all it does. And then she moves on, at which point her grandmother introduces her to like a photo album that she finds in that same closet. And that's where she finds out about Uribo from her grandmother's side. So her grandmother explains more about Uribo, how he once saved her life. And it was because they used to like to climb on the roof of their houses and they were neighbors. And she wonders where he's at to this day. She didn't know that he passed away. And Oko asks him how he passed away. He explains after his best friend left, he would go onto the roof where they used to play every now and then because he missed her. And then one day the tile slipped and he fell. So her grandmother never knew that he was watching over her this entire time. Moving the story along, she goes to school now. By the end, she has to still get education. She's in elementary school. She's a little girl. And she meets another girl at the school who everybody nicknamed Frilly Pink because she always loves to wear outrageously big puffy dresses, usually pink or outlandish colors, and quotes like major authors and famous people like Steve Jobs and Walt Disney to make herself seem more intelligent. And apparently she's also an innkeeper too, but she's managing a very wealthy inn as opposed to Oko's grandmother's inn, which is a very low and country homey inn. And they get into a little bit of a discussion, which turns into an argument because she looks down on Oko. Oko is laughing at the same time because Urobo is making these illusionary images on her face for Frilly Pink, like these little squiggly lines and mustaches that only Oko can see. Frilly Pink thinks that Oko's mocking her. So it's a great way to start a relationship. That's when we get introduced to our secondary ghost. Oh yes, there's more than one. Mio, who doesn't really show herself directly. Instead, what she does is after Oko laughs at Frilly Pink, she literally takes a marker and draws on Oko's face mustache. So not illusion, she uses actual marker. All the kids are like, you're weird, but we like you. Some time goes by and she runs into this father and son on her way back from school. And the father and son look like they are homeless practically. They're covered in soot. They look sickly. And the father says, like, his son is sick. So Oko invites them to stay at their inn. And they go, and they accept the invitation. They never really explain it, but it turns out, like, I imagine they have money. Then they clean up pretty nicely, and they act like they can afford stuff. And the son still has, like, an iPad and all this other stuff. So it's not like they're poor. It's just, for whatever reason, they looked poor. But what happens there is, after they clean up, turns out that the boy was feeling sick. I would say he was more depressed. And the reason behind it was the fact that about a month ago, his mother passed away. And his father's taking him to travel. So they went to visit a gravesite and they went to visit some other areas. And the son is just really depressed and doesn't want to deal with anything. And he gets into a little bit of an argument with Oko because they gave their condolences and how sorry they were. He's like, that's the first response everybody says. They always want to give your condolences. And he's like looking down on them on it. And Oko's like, don't be rude. And they're like, we're trying to be nice. He's like, what do you know about this? She's just like, I lost both my parents. You still have your father. And he's like, and yet you're still trying. He's like, that annoys me that people try hard as they can even though they really shouldn't. And so they really went back and forth and she got in trouble because she insulted him. Granted, he insulted her first, but the grandmother's like, it doesn't matter, he's still a guest. So they eventually have to apologize to this boy, and the father's very polite. He's apologizing for his son, and the son makes a request and he asks for something to eat after feeling a little bit more energized. He asks for rice omelet and cake. They don't have cake, so Oko makes a run in the middle of the night to pick up cake, and all the bakery shops are closed. And she realizes that she could actually make a dessert, and she got inspired by this because she had some pudding in one of the cutscenes before she met this boy when she was cleaning. It's like a spring pudding. So she comes back and she starts baking and she makes this original pudding recipe just for him, and he refuses it. He just tosses it aside. He doesn't toss it, but he just pushes it aside. He's like, I want a cake. And the father still enjoys it, but they set the cake aside. And the grandmother did something that was really nice where she set extra food aside for the mother that passed away, and they put a picture of the mother. And the boy started crying and he covered himself in his sheets. Now, when Oko goes back to her room, she has a spare pudding set aside for her parents too. Looks like her grandmother did the same thing for her. And then she goes to sleep. Now, by this point, Oko is having dreams. So every time she goes to bed, she's seeing her parents. She's questioning whether or not they're alive. And like in this dream, she's actually having her parents eat her pudding. And she wakes up in the morning and the pudding's been eaten. She comes back to check in on the new customers. The boy thanks Oko because they're checking out. And he thanks her because he did eat the pudding. He said it was delicious and it was good for him because he actually got to have one final meal with his mother. And he was happy to do so. He was also laughing at her because the mystery ghost that drew a mustache on Oko before also drew another mustache on her before she got to see him. And she didn't realize it until he saw her. So that was a funny moment. After he drives away in the taxi, that's when she goes on an errand to pick up supplies, and she sees like the sky full of kites that are designed like fish and koi. Turns out Frilly Pink Girl was hanging up a bunch of kites, I don't know, for like a festival or some kind of celebration. That's where we get to see the mystery ghost. The mystery ghost is Mio, this blonde-headed little girl who is like just throwing around these little pranks, and she does this one thing thing where she releases one of the kites and Uribo tries chasing down Miyu, and it becomes this whole thing where the kite is like chasing down Uribo and it crash lands back at Oko's inn. When they realize this, that's when the little girl introduces herself to the rest of everybody else, and she lets her know that Frilly Pink is actually her little sister. She was the older sister and she passed away before Frilly Pink was born. And they go, well, okay, so you must be the one who's doing all this other stuff, and like, so that means that you're the only other ghost here. Miyu, no, there's someone else here. And that's when they introduce another character, Suzuki, and they're like, the motorcycle? And he's like, no, that's my name. And Suzuki is a bell demon. Apparently he's supposed to be able to draw in people to the area, so he's like, that's how come we're getting clients, it's because of me. And Uribo's like, you're only bringing in troublemakers. He's like, well, I am a demon. And Miyu and Uribo are like, well, let's just put him back in the box that he came out of. And he's like, no. Oko, she goes, no, let's keep him out, but you can't be freeloading. You have to do some chores and help out. And he's like, I promise I will. So now Oko has Miyu and Suzuki doing the chores around the inn to help out. And she's also working. She's not doing nothing. The only one that's doing nothing is Uribo. He's a lazy kid. Now, moving all the story along, that's when we meet another character. Her name is Glory, and she's a psychic. So when we first meet her, Oko walks into her room because she was supposed to bring her food. The entire room is like engulfed in smoke, and like there's like windows are all covered. All Oko sees is like this crystal ball and this like giant hand coming from the smoke, and there's Glory covered in robes sitting there looking at the ball, and she freaks out and she trips over the electrical plug, and turns out it's like a smoke machine and all this stuff. The funny thing is, Glory's job is a professional psychic, so she's just rehearsing her show, and she was a little bit depressed, so she gets into conversations with Oko. Oko, being the cheery little kid that she is cheering up Glory, and Glory asks her, is like, you ever been shopping? Like, you ever go out shopping just for like a healing day? She goes, no. She's like, well, we're going on a trip. And Glory drives her to the mall. Now, this is important to note. On the trip to the mall, Oko has a panic attack. She seems cool at first, and she has these little dolls that she made of all her little ghostly friends. But in the middle of the drive, she does have a panic attack. She starts remembering the moment before her parents passed away, seeing the truck actually hit the car, and she's hyperventilating. She's having trouble putting her thoughts together. She's freaking out. Glory has to pull her over, and that's when she realizes what happened. Like, she didn't know. It's not like they advertised this. From there, Miyu, Uribo show up, and she's like, you've been with me? And they're like, we were here the entire time. We're never leaving your side. That brings her back in. Even though they're ghosts, she has friends. Now, we cut to them finally making it to the mall. They do like a whole shopping montage, dressing up, having the fun, and Glory decides to buy her a bunch of clothes. Oko's like, no, I can't take these. And she's like, just accept this from like an elderly friend. Glory explains to her why she was at the inn in the first place and why she was depressed is because she was dealing with a breakup with someone that she truly loved. The issue was she took that love for granted because she believed too much into her psychic powers. She believed that they were a perfect match, which may be true, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't put the work in. And what happened was she just put too much into her work rather than into her relationship. And he ended up breaking up with her on what was supposed to be like her luckiest day. So that made her question like her abilities, her life, her choices. And that's why she ended up where she was. But you can see that she's kind of feeling rejuvenated after getting to know Oko, realizing the things that she's went through and she's still powering through. She now wants to go back to work, so she leaves the inn. Fast forward a little bit more, and now Oko is starting to take dance lessons with Frilly Pink because now they're getting ready for the new festival that's coming up, because they got to do this festival. This festival comes around like once a year, and every year they choose new people to dance. It's like an honorary position. So because both girls are going to be heads of their inn, they were chosen. By this time though, Uribo and Miyu are starting to have trouble being able to be seen by Oko. Suzuki confronts Oko and tells her soon, if not not by the festival, that Uribo and Mio are gonna disappear. They're gonna go to heaven. They're ready to move on. So this is why they're starting not to be able to show up as much. While this revelation is happening, new guests arrive, and they're all drawn in because the inn is now being a little bit more famous due to the first two guests I mentioned. Turns out the father he works for magazines and he writes articles, and his article became very famous and popular about reviewing the inn. And so she became like a small celebrity. So people started showing up all the time now just to see Oko. This new family shows up with a little boy. His name is Shota, and their father and mother. Shota is like this little boy. He likes to throw rocks at animals and whatnot, but he's just a troublemaker. But he grows attached to Oko super quick. The mother is very concerned about the father because the father just got out of the hospital and is super ill. And Oko takes it upon herself to maintain and watch over the family while they're at the inn. The father refuses to eat the food, even though they cooked it to the specifications that was asked for, but it tastes like hospital food because he's like missing a kidney and like a pancreas or something like that. So he's on a strict diet, and he's like, it's too bland, I can't enjoy this. So Oko has a genius idea to go to the other inn with Frilly Pink, eat crow, because they've been going back and forth throughout this entire movie, and ask her for advice, which she concedes and gives the advice on how to cook healthy meals that will still be tasting well. And then she gives them like a bunch of recipes and like one very expensive piece of meat to take with her. So Oko comes back, talks to the chef. They make some really good meals that I actually would love to eat as well. They make like sake soaked rice or like red wine soaked rice that's cooked with mushrooms. I'm like, this sounds actually very delicious. After eating, there comes a moment where the father's recollecting, and you can tell he's grateful for the meal because he realizes is like he didn't really think that he could have a good meal anymore. And at the same time, he feels remorseful that he can enjoy something so good. And the reason he feels remorseful is because now I gotta mention, he's also saying this aloud, is because he had just been in a hospital. He was in a small coma, and obviously he was missing organs. He's still recovering. The reason this all happened was because he was in an accident. It was a highway accident, and he was driving his truck. These two cars crashed in front of him. He tried to avoid the two cars, but in doing so, he ended up crashing into the other lane, into another car with a family, a husband and wife who only had one child, a daughter. And he said the one saving grace was that the daughter survived. And it is at this moment that Oko's watching him explain this, and he doesn't know about Oko. And she is starting to tear up and cry because she's realizing this is the man that was driving that truck that killed my parents. As I mentioned earlier, she's been having visions of her parents usually when she's asleep. And at that moment, she turns to the side and she sees her parents standing there in the image next to the family that she's taking care of. And her parents are telling her, we're sorry we can't be there with you. We wanted to be there with you your entire life. And she's like, you told me that you were still alive. And it's like, but we're not. And then they disappear. And she is breaking down crying. Now the guy still doesn't know what's going on, but she runs out from the room and she's looking for Uribo and Mio and Suzuki, and they're not showing up. And she knows that they're disappearing, and she sees a light outside one of the doors, so she runs outside thinking it might be them, and she runs into the street and she almost gets hit by a car. Fortunately, it was Glory that was driving the car, and Glory is like, I had a feeling that I was needed back here. And she was talking to Oko, and the two of them were sitting in the car as Oko explains the entire story. She's there crying and everything, and Oko gets to a moment where she realizes that she can't hold on to that past, where she acknowledges the saying that her grandmother and her family and everybody says that this inn is a special place. And the reason why it's special is because it's accepting of everyone. And it's not really the water that's accepting, it's the people that are there that are accepting of everyone. And it's the healing that's the most important thing. Making people happy is what heals people. She doesn't say in that many words, but that's what I gathered from it. She becomes more collected in herself because she realizes who she wants to be. As she's walking back to the inn, she sees that the family is trying to leave. The father, the wife. Shota is glued to the door. He does not want to leave. He likes it there. He's like, you guys can leave. I want to stay. By this point, the grandmother has already realized who these people are, and she called in Frilly Pink to try to give them a place to stay in such short notice. Oko shows up, Shota hugs her. He's like, "Can I stay?" And she's like, "Of course you may." The father's like, "How can I after what I've taken away? You know, you're the only daughter of this family." And she goes, "That's not me. I'm the future innkeeper of this inn." And she says this with like tears in her eyes. That whole bit right there with the father and the son and her family had me in tears. It was really hard to watch that scene. They did such a good job with that. And honestly, they could have ended the movie there, but they didn't. They continued. So now they finally make it to the festival. By this point, Frilly Pink is getting a little bit more used to her. She confides into Oko that she had an older sister that passed away. And every now and then she feels like her older sister is giving her words of advice or encouragement, which turns out to be really true, but she doesn't really know it because she never saw her. And they start dancing at the festival. And as they're dancing, Uribo and Mio show up and they're dancing alongside them. And they're talking to Oko, telling her that we're getting ready to leave, but we'll see you again because we plan to be reincarnated. And when we do get reincarnated, we will absolutely come back to visit you. She's like, "Will I recognize you?" And they're like, "Of course. We're friends and we care for each other." And she looks out into the audience as she's dancing with Uribo and Mio, and she sees her parents one last time watching her dance before they disappear. So the way I take it is that her parents moved on to heaven just like Uribo and Mio. And then that's when they cut to the credits. So after that lovely recap, I have to say I really do like this movie. Art styling, I didn't think it was overly ambitious. I liked it in the sense that it's a simple style that I can digest. They didn't really try to pull in a lot of CGI items or try to overdo it and like overly ambitious with their art techniques. Like some animes you watch and you're just gonna go like, "Wow, that looks like an art piece." No, they didn't do that. But at the same time, it wasn't garbage. It was good. Music, there was only like a couple points in the sound score where the music really stood out and felt like it was needed to be there to really carry the story along. So it wasn't really too strong of a point there. The biggest thing about this movie is the story. I thought it was a beautiful story. The characters are fun. They're enjoyable. Watching it both in subtitle and dub, I thought the dialogue worked well with it. So you can relate to the characters and you don't feel disconnected from them. I didn't feel any of the characters made me feel that way. Like I watch a movie and I feel like I can't enjoy it or feel drawn into it because their portrayal of it doesn't fit. And for a movie that seems fun, it has some moments where it gets heavy. There's comedy, of course, and there's like lightheartedness, but the undertone is a very, very heavy undertone. You're dealing with a movie that is, the subtext is about loss. And for those of you who skipped the recap, the synopsis of the film, just briefly, is you have Oko, this little girl who lost her family, and she's staying with the last member of her family, her grandmother, at a spa, and she's the innkeeper. That's why it's called Oko's Inn. That's where she's staying. And while she's there, she encounters spirits. And it's the experiences that she has with those spirits that carry her through. And it's nothing scary. It's nothing that is jarring. The spirits are actually like, think of them like Casper-friendly ghost kind of spirits, but better drawn. But when they want to give you the feels, when they want to drop the emotion onto you, they hit you hard. I watched this movie twice now. The first time I watched it with my mother, who she enjoyed it. And she's not an anime person. I wanted to watch it again because I enjoyed it the first time, but I felt like I didn't really process it all the way through. So this time I watched it a second time and I could really process. And I had a good cry on one particular moment, and there was 2 other times I teared up. This movie made me feel attached to it. I wasn't crying because I felt depressed, although one scene that made me really cry made me feel connected to the character, and I felt, even though I didn't have her experience, I felt sympathy for her pain. And the other 2 moments, like one moment made me feel happy. It was like tears of happiness for her. And then another moment was just relating to her and knowing that like that's a hard experience to go through. To me, that's a difficult task to portray in a movie, much less in a cartoon animation. And I've said that before in a couple other animes I've watched where you're enjoying it and then all of a sudden you're feeling attached to your emotions. That's a very difficult thing to do. I can imagine kids watching this and getting those points past their head and they don't realize what this is all about. But if your kid is a smart kid and they're watching this, when that hits, be prepared. If you're going to let your kid watch this, they're probably going to end up crying. So you may want to watch this movie first to judge whether or not you want your kid to cry or not. As a grown man, I would say this is a comfortable film to watch. Enough of my jabbering. In regards to it, I am going to rate this movie a 4 out of 5. I've watched it twice. I would say this is a movie that you can watch sparingly. It's not one that you would watch like all the time. I think that will actually cheapen the experience of the film. But it's one that if you watch, you can enjoy it. You can have fun with it. It's lighthearted at many moments. And if it makes you feel emotional and attached to it, then it's okay. You can feel emotional and attached. If you don't feel emotional attached, then it's still going to be a fun movie. I will put this in like a supernatural slice of life. So this is its main goal is to show the importance of healing after trauma. Again, this is a movie that I think anybody could enjoy. I don't think it's something that everybody will enjoy, but majority of your people will. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 Nerd Tots. If you guys disagree with me, let me know. I was conflicted about this decision. And if you have a suggestion for another movie, let me know also. Put it in the comments below. As always, if you like what I'm doing, hit that like button. Hit subscribe. Continue watching anime. Expand your mind. And just be excellent, everybody.
Let's go.